so I'm just going to let you go. But how would you describe the Data Sleuth source and use analysis summary?
So this one, I mean, I'm excited to talk about all of these because they're kind of like the bread and butter core of the analysis that we do. But I feel like the source and use in particular has been around since before I started at Workman. You guys were doing this, but it's also just really cool. I think how we've kind of improved it, refined it, made it work for us over the last few years. But really, I think sometimes people are kind of taken aback by how conceptually simple it is. All it is just a way to summarize where funds in an account came from and then how they were used. Literally the source and the use of funds. I mean, that's what we put at the top of every work paper is the source and use of funds analysis. That's all we're doing. And we summarize by payee or payor for expenditures. Um, and basically, we're just, summarizing how much came from or was paid out to different sources. We do kind of sort things a little bit. We'll pull out withdrawals, transfers, things that appear to be corporate entities like LLCs or things like that. So there is a little bit of subgrouping that can make it more useful for us or for the client, but really it's a pretty simple work paper.
Yeah, it's just a reorganization and summary of everything that happened in a bank account, credit card account. Have we ever used it really? We haven't really used it on like any GL stuff. It's mainly like account heavy
Yeah.
transactions. Yeah, I remember the day that this hit me because I used to scroll through bank statements because whenever I first started, I was entering all the lines of the bank statement. So I kind of knew what to look for. So I'd kind of scroll and then I'm like, oh, let's filter for transfers, let's filter for wires. But it was all these steps that I then had to remember to train my staff on. And so by creating the source and use summary, this let us look at all those things in a uniform fashion. Like I could, instead of saying, oh, did you also check for this on this big schedule of bank statement transactions? I didn't have to ask. They could just run the summary. Now, in the book, I believe, well, at least in the trainings that we do going that coordinate with the book, I use Excel as our like how we run these and everything. But internally, we kind of have a whole process that's more automated. But the source and use summary can really just be made with subtotals or pivot tables.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say if you're just using Excel, I think pivot tables would be a pretty easy way to do it. The other thing you just kind of describing that made me think the other thing that I think is like really simple but really powerful about it is that you don't just have to run it on one account. A lot of times we'll combine, all the personal accounts related to a case, or if there's multiple accounts related to a business entity, maybe they have an operating account and a savings account or something like that. It can really be an efficient way to do your analysis to combine all those into one schedule and then run a source and use on that.
Yeah. So, what types of cases is this analysis important?
So I mean, we run it on almost every case, but a lot of our more common use cases would be, as far as the use of funds side of things, embezzlements, partnership disputes, estate and trust issues. Essentially, anytime our client is concerned that someone with access to that bank account or group of accounts was using the funds inappropriately. The source side, I think, is a little less common. So that use side, I think we use on almost every case. The
Hmm.
source side, have it be really useful in a case, we usually have to request and schedule deposit items, which we talked about those last episode or the one before, and we talked about data processing. But whether we do or don't have those deposit items, the source side can be useful if you want to identify maybe whether funds that should have been deposited were diverted. If you, in a kind of a simple, really broad brush way, there are some more detailed ways we can look at it that we'll talk about later. But maybe you just don't see any deposits from a payee at all that you did expect to see. So it can be a precursor to kind of more complex types of comparative analysis, just kind of a quick first pass overview of what's in the account. Sometimes you see unexpected sources of funds, and that can kind of tell us about connections between entities that we maybe didn't know existed. And I'm thinking of, we did a bank case. Was it last year or the year before? I feel like the pandemic has completely skewed my sense of time, but um, we had a big bank case and we looked at a ton of accounts, and there were some kind of side threads to that investigation that we sadly didn't get to fully follow up on. They just weren't really within the scope. And I know you know what case I'm
Yes.
talking about.
Yes.
But I feel like seeing some sources of funds into certain accounts kind of triggered some, oh, we didn't know that these two individuals or entities were connected. In a divorce case, the source side could reveal sources of income that we didn't previously know about. Um, those are kind of just off the top of my head, but I mean, super broad application. We use this. If even if this, we don't send these to the client very often anymore, but we almost always run them just because it is, like you said, Leah, just a way to kind of reorganize the data that we have for the case. And it's, since we do have it so automated, it's really quick to run, and it's just kind of a good first pass look at things for us.
Yeah, and going back to the bank case you talked about, I have thought back to that case a lot, and I don't think we would have been as successful without the source and use. Because we ran that, we had to identify a lot of parties that were connected and a lot of bank accounts that were connected. And there were a lot of entities that were connected. And if you've ever done any research on entities, you know that they can, an individual doesn't have to list, like I don't have to list that Leah Wheatholter owns Workman Forensics. I can use an attorney or a CPA or somebody else to be the registered agent in that state. And so just running a Secretary of State search or database search would not have necessarily identified all of the entities we were looking for or the relationships with people. Because if you want to know if people are related or not, see if they're paying each other money. Like we can go and interview all day long, but if I can see how they're spending their money, I can make some of those relationships work. And I trust this data more than I trust like interviewing most people. So that's where I'd prefer to start. Not that one necessarily works with the other, but I just, for this case, I just really don't know how we definitely wouldn't have found everything we found without the source
And
and
the
use.
sheer volume for
Well,
that
yeah,
case,
that case.
of the number of bank accounts that we had to look at, it was great to have something like the source and use that's relatively simple and fast to run. And I
Mhm.
feel like could get us a lot of information really quickly.